So can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So let's see here. How many participants do we have? We have 7. Okay, great. um, yeah, thanks for everyone for joining. So I would like this to be a collaborative session. So, feel free to just stop me, ask me anything. But just to kick it off, does anybody want to just say hi and just like want to say if they're working on Kubernetes or what are you looking forward to or want to learn from this session? Hopefully, anybody want to call it out?
So I'll say a few words.
Yes, please.
So I'm working in a digital marketing company as a senior application developer, and nobody in my company really, uses Docker Kubernetes. They're all kind of afraid of it. So I wanted to, I know a little bit about Docker, and heard buzzwords about Kubernetes, but I want to see like, is it easy enough that I can take what I want from this is, can I take a like monolithic web application, break it down into little microservice kind of things, and they're joined with maybe queues or whatever, and then um, will Kubernetes let me take my regular business application and let it, run as easy as, like, these days we use Azure App Service, right? And we deploy it and we forget it, right? Is Kubernetes, is it that simple? Like once you employ it, so I want to know that.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll speak on that for sure. Some of the points there. Anybody else want to like mention like what they hope to get out of or where they're coming from? No? Okay. So I'll just start the talk, and I don't want this just to be about me talking, but hopefully each one of you would come out of this session kind of with some key takeaways and action items for yourself. So that's what my hope is from this presentation. But okay, so this session, this is not the first time I've done this in the community. And so, yeah, many people, I have to say, like the audience are just in that very early stages of like, what is Kubernetes? What's this all about? How can I apply it in my own work or my projects? That's kind of where everyone's at. Like, I'm not a Kubernetes expert, but I'm getting pretty experienced. So, but yeah, it's a very, very early and exciting technology. Okay, so to introduce myself, my name is Roy Kim. I've been working with Microsoft Technologies for, 14, actually 15, 16 plus years, and really worked. Lately, my focus has been Azure, but before that was like Office 365, SharePoint, custom .NET development. That's kind of been my background, right, in the more consulting space. Requirements gathering, build, design, build, and deploy. I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP and most valuable professional. It's been 3 years with this designation. This just means it's not, through my speaking engagements and my technology kind of participation or contributions in the community, Microsoft has awarded me with this designation. I'm an independent consultant. I blog, and you can see my website at roykin.ca. And I went to University of Toronto with a computer science degree. So, so what are we going to talk today? We're going to just cover like what is Azure Kubernetes Service, and an AKS kind of architectural pattern. the tools used to build and deploy, and some security and networking concepts, and a little bit of planning for kind of DevOps. So it's pretty loaded and jam-packed, and I'll go through some demos. Okay, so first of all, you know, um, let's talk about like what does it mean by a containerized application or microservices, right? So you know, it's a big topic in it of itself, but you know, basically in a microservices architecture, you can have um, an application that's kind of like chopped up in various pieces into like a bunch of like services. And a services is just really a set of web APIs, right? And also services such as like your front end that serves up HTML and JavaScript and images. Also, you can have middle tier services and even a database and queues and some storage kind of services, right? And they all talk with kind of one another, right? So the key thing with microservices architecture, or one of the key things, is that you can deploy each service kind of independently instead of deploying it all at once, and that's the term kind of monolithic, right? So traditionally we would deploy things kind of one big, like, one big deployment, like kind of front tier, middle tier, you can, on their own, but like you can get more granular and then deploy in services, right? So so that's one key thing. Unique value prop is that deploy them independently. Also from scaling, right? Performance wise, you can scale them independently, right? Not all of them all at once. So scale them across different like nodes or VMs and etc. Right? So when you have like this microservices architecture, kind of the key question is, how do we host it, right? What's the hosting infrastructure for such an application, right? Do we have a VM for every single microservice, right? Then we're going to have like, according to this example, right? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 like, VMs, right? But with the container technology and with Kubernetes as the orchestrator, we can manage that manage that in a better way, right? Manage it such that they're all densely packed, and you're not taking up too much infrastructure resources, right? So, um, so that's kind of like the key thing about Kubernetes is to support this type of application kind of architectural style. Okay, so what is Azure Kubernetes Service, right? Actually, before this, I should mention like what is Kubernetes by itself, right? Kubernetes was built by Google. Basically, I think it started out with Google, kind of open source kind of platform for orchestrating kind of like containers, like multiple containers, right? So orchestrating meaning like where to deploy each container to, like which infrastructure kind of node, or the networking, security, kind of putting it all together, right? On top of the kind of containers, especially when you have a multi-container application. Okay, and where Azure comes in is that part of actually before that. So you can put Kubernetes in a VM. Let's see here, a virtual machine kind of infrastructure, right? So then you have multiple VMs, but really kind of Azure takes that type of infrastructure and kind of puts it like in a platform as a service, kind of partially, right? So that you don't have to manage the infrastructure so much if you just go all VM, So sorry, if I can mention, like, so I hear this clicking sound that's happening all the time. So if someone can mute them, okay, thanks. Okay, so Azure Kubernetes Service, it's part of the Azure platform. It helps kind of orchestrate it, and I'll talk about that next later on. manages container-based applications, just like what we saw, so that you can focus on more of the deployment, right, and or the build, right, kind of from a developer point of view, right. And it provides like a declarative approach of a deployment through kind of YAML files, which I'll show you, right? And you can host your application with multiple operating systems. You don't have to, you can have it based on like either Linux or Windows Windows operating system, Windows containers, right? Which is kind of, I think, in preview right now in AKS, right? And you can plug in your current CI/CD kind of tools, right? Like Azure DevOps pipelines and stuff into Azure Kubernetes Service. So as I mentioned, so there's two kind of key portions of AKS. So there's an Azure managed portion, okay, that Microsoft manages. So this is kind of like more of a platform as a service kind of style, where customer managed is more based on like the worker nodes, right, that actually run your application. So the cluster manager is like that orchestrator part, right? There's an API server that that responds to your CLI commands, the kubectl commands. Scheduler to, when you're deploying an object, it knows which node to put it into, or figures out which node to put it into. So it's really, think of it as kind of like the brain, right, of the whole cluster, right, of kind of managing networking and security. And so all this is in a way kind of like a micro data center, so to speak, right? So it has own little DNS service and all that stuff, right? So so when you spin up Azure AKS, the nodes are basically kind of VMs. So if I can turn to, let's see here, what it looks like from the Azure Portal side. So something that I've deployed previously. So here you have an AKS service, okay, and you go to like the node pools, okay, and here I have a node pool that has two nodes, right? Typically for production, you want to have like three or more, and the Kubernetes version that was like installed into the nodes, okay. And also the actual version that you like to leverage, you can upgrade it, and the ability to scale, okay. You can scale to more nodes, like 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. So AKS is kind of bound or associated to a virtual network as well. And let's see, if I go properties, and then, so there's like this special infrastructure resource group, Azure resource group, that's got all the bits to, okay, I don't know why it's blurred out here. Let me refresh. See here. Okay, never mind. Let me see here. Okay, here we go. We can use this one. So where we have, let's see here, internal load balancer, right? And your nodes, right? So this is something called a virtual machine scale set, okay? And right now there's two of them, okay? And you can see the CPU network and disk, and you can kind of scale them out to more nodes, and you see each VM running, okay? So so that's kind of like behind the scenes of how kind of AKS what AKS looks like behind the scenes. So as you can see, in terms of like that that managed portion right here, it's really behind the scenes, right? Like I can't really turn on or turn off or see the VMs or anything like that, right? So if I go back to the Kubernetes service here, there's really no indication of that managed portion, right? And but only the worker nodes. And again, the worker nodes host your
Maybe
deployed
I'm
applications.
attending a 1 hour session.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, can someone mute themselves? I can hear something. Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving on. Okay, any questions so far? Anybody have questions? No?
Well, I have a question.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
So what exactly is a node? Do each of the nodes, hiccups.
Yeah, no
Do
worries.
each of the nodes hold a microservice?
Yeah. So, yeah, eventually it will. So node, okay, think of node as a virtual machine, okay, that I just showed. And like a part of a pool, right? And inside it has kind of basically the Kubernetes installed on those nodes, right? And it's set up so that you can deploy a microservice, like a container, a Docker, image or Docker container, right? And then you can start to run that. So, like for example, like this application right now, right? It's a public IP. This is an sample application I deployed, right? And it is running in AKS, right? And like certain pieces of this page is being served by different like containers. Does that clarify?
Yep.
Okay, but I'll get into more details. Okay, maybe okay, so maybe this diagram would kind of help, right? So one key thing about AKS is that essentially I like to say that it's a infrastructure as a service, right? And it's kind of bound or associated to a virtual network, specifically to a subnet within a virtual network. Okay, and there's something called an Azure Network Interface. So within this kind of virtual machine cluster or each virtual machine, there's like kind of like a plugin or module within within Kubernetes that like a special plugin that will help kind of work interoperably with the Azure Virtual Network. Okay, so the key thing is that AKS can be bound to a virtual network, and that virtual network can be kind of networked to an on-prem network, right? So you can get internal traffic, most of the time, right? So, and then here, okay, so to answer your question probably through this is that once we have like a node, okay, we have, so in Kubernetes, kind of like the smallest logical like object is something called a pod, and a pod can contain one or more containers, right? Usually it's kind of one-to-one. One pod holds one container, and then and more than one container, kind of more like exceptional cases, right? So you can have multiple nodes, and then each one node can have multiple pods, and so within the pod holds like a Dockerized, like a containerized application, right? Which runs the application. So I can go more into detail. One cool thing with AKS is that you can work with other PaaS services like storage, SQL database, Cosmos DB, Key Vault here, and Azure Active Directory, right? So basically you can kind of extend this kind of Kubernetes universe, leveraging other Azure services, right? Which can be pretty cool, right? So keep that in mind. So here's another type of like microservice architecture with AKS, kind of different point of view. So here, within AKS, you have something called a front end, like that has an ingress, and the ingress is basically exposing services, like your applications to be exposed external to the AKS cluster, right? And typically, kind of out of the box, when you deploy AKS, you have an Azure load balancer, okay? And that load balances kind of HTTP requests from clients to various backend like pods. or services. So each one of these squares is a pod that contains like a container, right? And backend service. So this could be your front end, and this calls a different service, and that calls a database, and this thing calls another service. Let's say shopping cart of some sort, and this is like ordering information or some, customer orders, and and they can have their own role and responsibility, right? Like kind of in a very granular fashion, right? And then you can have different utilities. Prometheus is for monitoring, kind of getting metrics, like CPU, HTTP requests per second, that kind of stuff. Elasticsearch, kind of for like a database, like indexed storage, right? Et cetera, right? And then here is basically kind of more for deployment using Helm, Azure pipelines, and then a container registry, right? So the container registry, this is also can be an Azure service, or you can leverage like Docker container registries or Google container, and that basically holds like Docker images that can be leveraged, right? So there can be a Docker image for like even an entire application of some sort out there. Let's say what's a good example, like a Splunk for monitoring, or some very sample applications, like for example, now let's see here, this this application was uh, brought in from a public container registry, right? That was already pre-built and everything. I just need to deploy that container, right? So that's what like a container registry kind of is, right? A repository. So any questions so far? Hopefully that answers that question there on what's a node, and how does that run applications. So it's really through a pod, and you can okay, and a pod executes the application runtime. Okay, so moving on. So let's just dive into a more of a demo, so it becomes a bit more clear. So okay, let's look at this sample app right here. Okay, so I got this from from Istio. Like they provide the sample app to, and Istio is really for like a service mesh kind of platform. But anyways, that's kind of more advanced topic. So basically, that application has multiple containers, right? So here's your front end, right? That's like your front end holds that page, that HTML page, the product page, and that product page makes a call to get like various reviews of the product. But in this case, there's 3 versions, right? That's been deployed, right? So one with like that shows like review stars, and one that shows three stars with that are colored red. So if I go back to let's see here, this application right here, and I hit refresh, you'll see that, I got stars that are red colored, so that I hit that version 3 review service. So if I do that, this is version 1, this is version 2, and then version 3. So I'm just doing reload, basically reload. This section here goes to the detail service, okay, right here, okay, and gets that information that's stored right here. For the reviews, the reviews 3 and reviews 2 pulls rating from another a containerized service called ratings, right, to find out the ratings. So this is a pretty good example where it's a multi-container application, okay? And the cool thing to notice is that you can deploy 3 versions at once, right? And basically in front of this is like a load balancer, right? And that load balancer will route in this case, to all three pretty evenly, okay? Now, a pretty good use case in deploying like a different version, right, is like kind of like A/B testing, right, or canary testing. So if you have a third version and you want to deploy it out, you can deploy pretty quickly, and then you can say that only 10% of traffic will go to the newer version of the service, and just to test it out if there's any big errors or anything like that. If you find that there's some errors, then you can pull it out easily, right, and then divert the traffic to the older versions, right? But if you feel you're confident in this new version, then you can let traffic in from 10% to 50%, or continue to deploy this V3 to the other pods, right, for just general kind of scalability, right? So that's kind of a unique scenario with kind of Kubernetes. The other cool thing that you notice here is that this containerized app is built and run in Python language, okay? The reviews is built on Java, right? And for ratings, it's Node.js, and for the detail service is Ruby, okay? So, so with Kubernetes, right, because of the containerized technology, right, you can have multiple kind of application platforms or frameworks, right? To have your application, right? So your entire kind of microservice application, because you may feel that Ruby is more suited for this type of service and Node.js for this type of service, right? So it just makes it easier in Kubernetes, okay? And what you see right here is just that, okay? Any questions so far? No? Okay, so moving on, just to give you a live demo of what a containerized application is like. So let's see here. I guess to show you that application, we can go into the Kubernetes dashboard. So this Kubernetes dashboard is actually running this itself in the AKS, right? And we can have here, we see here deployments, right? So let's see here. So we have a list of all the pods here, right? Reviews version 1, reviews version 3, the product page, and they're all running, right, as within a pod. Okay, so if I click here, product page, we have some information like creation time, etc., etc. We can go into the logs of this, right, to see if there's for troubleshooting purposes. Let's see here, what we have here. You can even kind of go into the shell of this service, right, to see kind of what's going on, standard error log, kind of what's in there. I guess there's nothing in there, things like that. So that's pretty cool. And let's see here. If we go to deployments, yes, yeah.
Is it within the Azure dashboard, Azure Portal?
No, this is not within the Azure dashboard. So this Kubernetes dashboard is actually running inside your AKS cluster.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the link is also generated for us to monitor that, the different pods running, right?
Oh, this app? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's to help. It's really a management application, right? To manage your cluster.
Okay.
So in the portal, you can't really manage the inside of the AKS cluster, right? It's just managing it as a resource.
Okay.
So you need to use the Kubernetes dashboard, okay, to manage kind of inside the Kubernetes the AKS cluster, right? So
okay.
So
right.
Here we have nodes. So again, we have two nodes, the two VMs, and we can see that information, right?
Okay, I have a couple of questions, if I may go on.
Yeah, sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Next one is let's say like I work in a company which has like close to 5,000 employees, and I'm implementing a Kubernetes infrastructure in my company.
Yeah.
If I currently leverage Azure, do I still have to like subscribe for the Kubernetes Enterprise Edition for me to spin up any clusters or nodes, or just Azure Kubernetes Services good enough?
So what do you mean by Enterprise Edition, like Azure Enterprise Edition?
No, Azure. Let's say if
So
you
can you speak louder? I can't hear you.
okay, if you want to run Kubernetes,
Yeah.
there's like Enterprise Edition like Docker, and also like the Basic Edition, for example, right?
Okay.
So I'm just like bringing up a scenario.
Okay,
If
sure.
I want to leverage Azure Kubernetes Service in
Mm-hmm.
my company to spin up the Kubernetes clusters,
Mm-hmm.
do I still have to rely on Kubernetes exclusively, uh, or everything is like built in and covered within Azure itself?
Yeah, it's all built in and covered, right? So,
Okay.
okay, so let me answer it in this way, right? So step one, in your company, you need to have an Azure subscription, like pay as you go,
Okay.
style, or if you have MSDN subscription, like
Okay.
Visual Studio Enterprise, that gives you like about 200 Canadian Azure credits a month. Okay, and that's enough for AKS. But either
Okay.
way, you just need Azure because subscription, and then you can just go in. Let me right here, and you just create a resource group. You click and add, and then you have your subscription, select it, put a name, etc., and off you go. There's no like whatever you mean by Docker Enterprise Edition. You don't need that
Okay.
because Kubernetes is basically it's open source, right? So
Okay. Okay. Sure. Makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, okay.
And my other question is, if you go back to the Kubernetes dashboard, please, there is the life of the pods, right? For like say 3 hours for the pods that you mentioned, or some pods like for a day.
Yeah.
Is there an option? Let's say if like I'm creating a pod from scratch on this Kubernetes dashboard, do
Mhm.
you determine that by default, or you can change it at any point of time? Let's say if there's a pod which is running and the
Mhm.
age of it is maybe 7 hours.
Yes.
Can you go back after you created it and change the age of the pod anytime, or no?
So why would you change the age of the pod? For what reasons?
No, I'm just asking you if you
Uh-huh.
can change it or no.
No, no, you can't. No, you can't really change it. You don't really care about managing the pod, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
When you deploy an application, um, let me answer this way. Like for me, I don't really manage the pod or anything about the pod, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a supporting object, for the application, right? That runs inside the pod. So yeah, anyways, you cannot change the age
Okay. All
like
right.
arbitrarily. Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. So this is community's dashboard, right? So just to show you, let's see here, kube system. I go into the default deployments. So let's see here, review default. Can I go to kube system namespace? And here you go, like this, in the kube system namespace, you have this Kubernetes dashboard deployment, and that itself is the application that's basically this Kubernetes dashboard. Okay, it's actually running inside AKS. Okay, inside a pod, basically, right? Replica set. So here's the pod. Okay, so that's what it looks like kind of behind the scenes. All right, so moving on. So hopefully this kind of architecture kind of makes more sense by going through that Kubernetes dashboard. Okay, and we kind of basically drill through all the various pods. Okay, so so what's the whole point of AKS? Like, what's the value proposition? Why is it so unique and special? And what's with all the hype? You know, so the main thing is the scalability, right? So you can scale each individual pod, right? So actually, let me show you that. So if I go to back to the default namespace that has the applications, okay, default overview. If I go with deployments, so let's say I had the product page. Right now, there's one pod, okay, and what I can do is I can scale it up to, let's say, 3 pods. Okay, I click OK. Right now, it's kind of in process. Okay, just give it a refresh. Okay, and now we have 2 pods. Okay, and then the other pod is being, so basically what's happening behind the scenes is that container registry that I was talking about, it's being, another Docker image is being pulled, right, from that container registry, and it's building up the pod in here, right? So it's really this sample app, right? And as I'm scaling up, there's no downtime, okay, because the original pod is serving the traffic at the moment, right? So let's see here. Let's go back to this one here. Okay, I'll refresh the page again, and there we go. We have three pods, and they're all running. So we go into here, replica set for the 3 pods. We have 3 pods right here, and as you can see, the age, right? So maybe clarify your question here. Like, can you change the age of the pod? Not really. Like, because let's say this one was 4 hours because I started this demo 4 hours ago, and then a minute ago I just scaled up, right? And we got 2 that just got created a minute ago, and that's the age, right? And then what I can do is I can scale it back down, right? So click say 1, and then again, like, the cool thing is that there's no downtime. You don't see any error messages or whatever, or as it's scaling down. Because again, like, the cool thing is this, like AKS, like the orchestration piece of it is elegantly and gracefully managing kind of all these things, right? So you don't have to, right? You don't have to like set it up or anything like that. It's already by design.
Okay,
right?
based on the application, you meant to say that the age is set based on the application and by design default. And
yeah, you can think of it that way. Yeah,
okay, sure.
yeah, you can think of it that way.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So,
can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please do.
So I just on while you're on this page, I was just wondering, like, this might be a stupid question, like, so what is AKS really getting me? Like, what if I had installed all these little these services as separate Azure apps, right? I mean, what is it, the cost? Because by making these like small, microservices, like, that's my one question. I'm confused. Like, okay, so there's one UI service which is calling like 3 different like backend services or web APIs. Why can't these be separate Azure apps?
Separate Azure apps?
Yes.
Yeah, it can be, but then it's the whole quote unquote orchestration of it all, right? It's about when you deploy, let's say you separate in different Azure web apps, as you're saying, right?
Yes.
They're fairly like very like distributed, like loosely coupled, like spread out, because they're all different Azure apps. So from a management plane, like it's very like spread out. You know what I mean? Where here it's all kind of tightly one dashboard. You can see everything. You can, when you do command line, what like here I'll bring up like kind of the command line here. You can manage through one CLI, right? So one management plane or control plane, right? Like kubectl get pods, see them running, kubectl deploy this, deploy that, kubectl get nodes, kubectl, like all these other things, right? Where if you're to deploy them into different Azure web apps, then you're clicking to, around. There's no, cohesive single pane of glass type of management, right? So that's one thing. And really, like what I just showed there, when you're scaling, right? It's being done pretty gracefully without any downtime. Like there's no effort around there. You don't have to think about it. So if you do a different Azure web apps, then you have to kind of deal with that. Like, how are you gonna load balance all that stuff together? You can, using Azure Load Balancer and this and that, but it's just more work and effort. You know what I mean? So, but let me answer your question differently. And it's kind of was my confusion too, and I think others may wonder too, like what's the whole point, right? In AKS, why can't you just do it, like what you're suggesting, right? So, okay, let me illustrate it in this way. So, like, let's say back to this application, right? Like, or okay, you know what? No, I want to do it from let's see here, from this point of view. Okay, so I think the main use case, right, that for your projects, why you want to go. So I don't think there's like a silver bullet answer saying that any project you do, you should do AKS. That's definitely a no-no. I truly think so. But I think the larger the application, right, it is, the more it makes sense, right? Like the larger, as in like the number of users, like the size of the application, like in terms of, number of services or lines of code, and how much data is going through it, like that kind of stuff. So basically, I think that like for internet startups that have like millions of active monthly users and all that stuff, I think they care about AKS and microservices architecture, because it turns out this way. Like, let's say you have this application, it's although the architecture looks simple, but it's huge in terms of like 10 million active monthly users, okay? And you have, whatever, gigabytes of data being produced per day. So each service, right, to make a small change is very sensitive for deployment, right? It's very sensitive in terms of quality and testing and all that stuff, right? So, when you have loosely coupled kind of distributed architecture, let's say for the reviews component, you have one team, like development team, dedicated to it, right? Let's say this details component, you have another application team, and it has its own life cycle and DevOps life cycle and all that stuff, right? So, it's because it's loosely coupled, you
अपना phone भी ले आओ.
you're not going to like disrupt other portions of the application, right? So like another use case is, let's say for this reviews section, right? Sorry, can someone mute themselves here? There, I can hear you. So let's say for this review section, okay, you're monitoring, you find that it's getting overloaded, okay? Maybe a certain product came out and it's very popular, and people are making tons of, wants to see the reviews or put up reviews, right? So without pumping out like new servers, right, you can scale this out like to 3 pods, 5 pods, to 10 pods. You know what I'm saying? And you don't need to scale out, these services, right? So you're making better use of infrastructure resources, CPU, memory, and disk.
Can I just on that exact note that you're talking, because this is a very important point. So let's say that you have 10 million users, and one day something happened, and then everybody started hitting the reviews API. Okay, and then you need to increase it, right?
Yeah.
So now you want to install more pods. So two things. One, I saw you manually, and you went and you increased it from 1 to 3 or some other number. Question one.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't have to do that myself. Like Kubernetes should see that my load is increasing. So will it increase the number of pods for me on its own? Is it auto
scale? Auto scale?
Yes, auto scale.
Oh yeah, most definitely. So there's something called node autoscaler.
Okay.
Right. So it will monitor like based on HTTP number of HTTP requests, CPU usage, and all that stuff.
Okay.
So yes, there's definitely autoscaler.
Okay. And then question two. So let's say that you've got reviews version 1, 2, and like in this diagram, 1, 2, and 3, right?
Yeah.
And suddenly you realize that another 2 million users, and you have to add 4 and 5. So how does my Python product page, how does that UI, how does it become aware of 4 and 5? Like, do you have to do some more coding, or does Kubernetes knows that I can now distribute my, I can start calling 4 and 5 too? Like, is that all automated?
Yeah, it's all automated because, okay, it's really like, there's really like a little load balancer service, okay, in front of this, right? So like your code will call an API like slash get reviews, okay?
Okay.
So the Python code, all it does is says slash get reviews, and then all it cares about is getting that JSON object, right? In the HTTP response,
right?
And that's all it cares. So then that get reviews, right, gets directed somewhere in the cluster, right? And Kubernetes knows that, okay, that it's going to the review service, right? So Python, like component here, does not care that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 pods, right? It just goes to a certain address, and then Kubernetes behind the scenes will take care of the networking, the load balancing of the requests. So that's how it works.
Makes sense. That's very nice. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a key kind of value, because all these things happen kind of somewhat automatically, and it's kind of like by design, right? It's really tight, So any other questions? Anybody else? No?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah,
I
sure.
have a question.
Sure. Yeah, speak up.
Yeah, this is Sanjay. Question like I'm new to like Kubernetes AKS, right? So I just want to do little hands-on like the website, sample website. So what do you recommend? How do you recommend I should start with?
Yeah, that's good. I think some others on the call is probably asking the same thing. So for me, so okay, how I started, honestly, like, I just started out with this specific tutorial, the Azure voting app. Okay, tutorial: prepare an application for Azure Kubernetes Service. You get the code. You create a Docker image, Docker compose up. You look at the Docker images, and then you can run that locally, right? It did, like, at this point it's not on AKS. Okay. Let's see here, and then you push that Docker image into a container registry, like the Azure Container Registry.
Okay.
Let's see here.
Yeah, this is same as that creating the AKS cluster in Azure DevOps, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Or yeah, in Azure platform, yes.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, and then you create the Azure Kubernetes service itself. Okay, with all these steps. Okay, and let's say, and then you deploy the application that's in the Azure Container Registry. right? So that's where you basically use kubectl, okay, and you deploy a YAML file that defines that application and has instructions or states what it looks like, or in AKS, okay, and then you find out the IP address, the public IP, and then you just run it, and then there's the voting app, right? So it was all within a Docker image, and then you just run some command line CLI commands, right? And then that's how you get it in there, and it's really easy, And so this is what I started out with,
Okay.
right? And then you start, once you do that, and then you're like, okay, go back and like, oh, what did I do, or why did it work? And then you start poking around, and then you start to do a different tutorial that you find on the internet, or watch YouTube videos, or explaining the concepts in detail, and etc. So yeah, that's how you start. You know what I mean? This is how I started.
Yeah, but the free Azure account, that 12 months thing, that should cut it, right? Should I buy a better subscription to handle all this?
Yeah, it's AKS is not it's not a cheap service, but make sure you have a small VM size when you create it, and then turn it off when you're done. So I never tried the free service, but let's see here. But yeah, maybe it could accommodate, but yeah, it's not a lot though, a lot of credits. So yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah. Thank you.
I
Okay,
have
cool.
one more other quick question.
Sure.
When I'm so I've got all these containers, right? So like, let's say I have my APIs I'm talking to, and I'm talking to some database. I'm talking to maybe Cosmos DB or so anywhere else. Like, so I'm one thing I'm confused about. Like, do I need to have like that Ruby example, like, or even this example? So do I need to have like any uh, queues? Like, do I need to implement any service bus queue or RabbitMQ myself for things to talk to each other? Or is that so that the backend, like, does it, the things get queued on a service bus queue or on RabbitMQ, and do I have to do any of that, or is that all also built in? So maybe it's confusing for me.
Oh, okay. So like a queuing service, is that built into
Yes.
Kubernetes,
Yes.
or?
Yeah, how do
Yeah,
things
yeah,
talk to each
yeah.
other? How do things talk? So how does, like, the front end talks to the back end API, but is it queued in the middle? Do I have to queue that with the RabbitMQ or something, with the queuing messaging something or
Got
something?
it, got it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so yes, you do have to implement your own queuing. Kubernetes out of the box does not have some kind of queuing. So it has kind of internal load balancing because, you can scale out like pods, So yeah, like like what you can do is, I'm sure there's like a Docker, um, like a Docker image Rabbit MQ out there, right? On, let's see here, see on Docker Hub. And you can, like, yeah, like, 500,000 people downloaded this, right? Like, you can um, deploy this Docker image of RabbitMQ, and then configure it, right? And you can use it that way.
So if I get a Docker image for SQL Server, right?
Yep.
Maybe it's a silly question, like, but is it free? Like, what? But usually SQL Server costs you. So how am I able to get it on Docker Hub?
Yeah, so I'm sure I never tried this, but yeah, you pull it, but obviously it's gonna, you got to put a license key, I would think, right?
Okay,
It's not gonna be free, right? Like,
okay.
yeah, like RabbitMQ, all these, I'm not familiar with RabbitMQ, but if that's, built by a company, right? Like, then yeah, you probably have to insert a license, right? So, but like, you know, like some of these are open source, like Node.js, there's no license needed, right? Like it's purely open source, right? So yeah.
RabbitMQ is open source too, so.
Is that, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
then that's free too. But yeah, things like this, yeah, you need a license key. Like I know I was just looking into Splunk Enterprise, right? Like they're not just going to give away for free just because it's containerized, right?
Right.
Like I installed it, right? But yeah, like there was a section to, you know, yeah, here, bring your own license or free up to like that. So yeah, it makes sense. Okay, cool. So okay, let me go through a few more slides. So the value proposition, right? Like is that scalability, like very granular scalability, right? Like you don't scale the entire application, you can scale different small pieces of the application, right? Like that's really cool. And it's resilience, right? So each piece is resilient because it's already scaled out, right? If one pod fails and you have 3 pods, you know, it'll keep going. Rolling updates is easier to do. So when you deploy a new like a container service and you have 3 pods, it'll just it'll deploy like pod number 1, and then to pod number 2, and then pod number 3. So any net new traffic, right, won't go to the older pods because while it's deploying, it'll go to the newer pods, right? Any old traffic will stick to the older pods and it'll just drain out. You know what I mean? You can do automatic updates of the AKS, like the Kubernetes version itself. You know, or well, you have to manually update it, but it updates without, like, it's just 2 clicks, right? The benefits of container, which I kind of touched upon that. You can host many applications, right? Kind of more densely because of the container technology, okay? And AKS supports like that, you know, microservices technology, right? So it's a big deal, like, but keep in mind if it's a small, I think this is where a lot of people get confused, is that if it's just a small application, you know, and it's really maintained by like 2 developers, then, you know, you don't need AKS, right? But if your organization has many small applications, right? You don't need to do microservices, but just one containerized app is that one application. You don't need to chop it up into many, right? Because all that application does is create, read, update, and delete, right? Like a bunch of database records, right? So it can just be one container. But then let's say your organization has, you know, like hundreds of those of different types of applications, right? Like, you know, then you know, maybe it's more cost effective managing it in an AKS cluster, right, than having, you know, 1 VM for each application, right? You know, so that's where AKS, or one huge massive application employing the microservices architecture, right? And each container is, you know, supported by even a dedicated application or DevOps team, right? So that's where AKS would become useful, right? So I hope that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like where AKS fits in. That's my opinion on how it fits, and that's where you get a lot of confusion, because I think most people, when they do an application, it's like you have a front tier, middle tier, and then database, and then they struggle to understand, like, why do I need to chop up that application, right, into microservices and put into Kubernetes, right? Like they struggle to see the true value when you only have like 2 or 3 developers supporting it, right? It's just, you know, it's kind of overkill to have. You know what I mean? Hope that makes sense. So, any questions there? Like my point there, or?
So I
Okay.
think it's good that example with the services, reviews, and Ruby, that one really, helped me a lot to understand it. So yeah.
Okay, great. No, thank you for that feedback, right? So, yeah, that's and you can see how it's all chopped up here, right? So again, if you have an application and it's just small, like small number of users, 2, 3 developers, it's really overkill to have it in AKS, right? And so, just to wrap up, some final thoughts here is that for me to share my experiences. Like AKS, like Kubernetes and Azure, it's a huge learning curve. Like it's crazy, to be honest, right? And I've been working on it for like maybe 4 or 5 months on it. Like I'm working on it right now, you know, like 100%, you know. And yeah, it's a big learning curve. Like I'm always feel like I have to kind of catch up on certain concepts kind of in my free time. But just be mindful that it is a heavy learning curve. I do see how the hype can be real, right? So me personally, it is something I want to invest my kind of one of the things I want to invest in terms of my kind of my career wise, right? I do think that there's value. It's not gonna like things are gonna move there, right? Um, and I think I encourage everyone to, you know, really learn slowly, you know, kind of thing, right? And all the questions I got right, you know, today from you guys, like, you know, it's like, you know, basic question, like that's where I get so far when I did this presentation, you know, in like meetup groups and, you know, in the kind of more, you know, in-person talks, right? So everyone's in the same boat. It's really early for the industry at large. I just think that where the adoption is the big internet startups like in like Silicon Valley and you know in the US, right? So that's where where it's being used heavily. So any right now we can just jump into kind of Q&A. So I do have a lot of slides, but I just found that, you know, everyone is kind of in beginner knowledge, so it's really better to go kind of slow, you know what I mean? So, but you know, here's my kind of Twitter handle, my email if you have any questions, my blog, like I have a bunch of AKS blog articles, right? You know, for especially kind of more like novices, you know. So, but yeah, any questions? Like
Um,
ask me anything.
I have one.
Sure.
So to tie up with my question that I started in the very beginning,
Yeah.
so it seems to me like let's say that I have something like a monolith application that I maybe can break it out into small parts. I see some value in that. To me, it's at a very high level. It seems like it's not as easy. Like I was comparing deploying with AKS compared to like a regular Azure app, right? It doesn't seem to be that easy because you do have to, you know, do some more work. You have to like put these some kind of service bus or because you have to make containers talk to each other, right? So
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to be that simple.
No, it's not.
It's not, right? So at the very, very, very end, like it's a scalability for sure, and that's why I see your point where you said like it's for like, you know, it seems like for big companies with a lot of users and for auto scaling and all that. So is it what's the really big proposition? Do you think it's scalability? Is it also be cost? Because now you can like, you know, maybe use the Linux containers or like is cost somewhere in this, or is running Kubernetes on Azure is that already so expensive that it doesn't even make sense?
Yeah. So yeah, it's for I'd say it fits for really large applications, right? To leverage the scalability, also deployment wise. So another really good scenario that AKS fits in is that let's say you deploy that like a shopping cart service, you're gonna roll one out, right? And again, you can just let 10% of the traffic go to the new version, right? And then and you know, and see if there's any like errors that pop up, right? You know, like check the logs, you know, like maybe before traditionally you would just deploy the whole thing, right? You know what I mean? Replace the whole thing, and then you have to roll back because, you know, there were some errors like, you know, like that was caught in production, right? That, you know, so you know, it's kind of like canary deployments, right? You just throw in like a canary bird, right? And if they don't, if they, you know, into a mine, if there's some gas, poisonous gas, then that's, you know, you minimize the risk, you know what I mean, right? The risk impact there, right? So that's just, it's easier to do those things, right? And again, it's for the really, like for the Amazons and, you know, like Ubers that have to deploy things every single day, right? You know, they don't want to have like 1 million users affected. They can suffer like 1,000 users that were affected, right, because of some you know, bad code. So that it's all about that, right? Like the managing of kind of, you know, production level kind of deployments, right?
Right.
So that's you know, where AKS fits in. I don't know. There was another part of your question. I'm not sure if I covered it all.
I was kind of summarizing it too. And so have you used AKS in any real company in Toronto, like in like as a regular company?
Yeah, I have, right? But it's all early stages. Like it's been more like proof of concept, you know. Yeah, because it takes a while to get into production, right? You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like, you know, it's the culture, the deployment wise, you know what I mean? Like, so it's still a slow process, right? So
Right. That makes sense. Some
yeah.
of my friends who are like medium sized, like gold, you know, that gold partners of Microsoft, even anybody I've talked to in the US, everybody's at an early stage.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely, right? So even Azure in general too sometimes, you know. So anybody else like questions or comments?
Well, I don't want to steal any thunder from Azure.
Yeah.
Because I appreciate you putting this on for us. But I do want to mention that, you know, you don't have to use AKS just to experiment. You can experiment with K3S or Minikube to get a feel for working with Kubernetes in a local development environment before you're ready to experiment with AKS.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, that's a very good point. So yeah, for those that are trying out, and I would say just start out with a local development like Docker engine, right? Or Minikube, right? That, you know, Minikube is like a little VM that's like a small Kubernetes. It's just Kubernetes, you know what I mean? Like vanilla Kubernetes, right? And just start with that, right? I think that's good enough, right? And then you move on to, like, you know, AKS or even Google. Google, was it Cloud, you know, engine or something like that? JKE, Google Kubernetes engine.
JKE,
Yep.
Yeah,
that, and you know, AWS as well,
yeah, I'm
or, you
looking
know,
on the
so
AWS one.
yeah. So, you
EKS,
know,
the
pick
AWS.
your flavor that you like, you know, and then, you know, build your career, right? You know, professional development in that way. So yeah, you know, Azure is just one of many options, right? You know, so yeah.
And the other plug I'll throw out there is that there's a Cloud Native Toronto group, meetup group, that had a bunch of meetups last year. I haven't seen anything recent, but I think they're still out there and active. There's also a Kubernetes group in Buffalo, New York, where I'm located.
Oh yeah, okay.
And so, you know, I would recommend anybody that's interested join those groups and keep your ear to the ground, because there's some there's interesting meetups out
put a message in this meetup, right? Or that Buffalo one. Like, I don't know, maybe I might do a road trip with some buddies, right? You know.
Hey, that'd be great, Roy.
To come down, you know. So
yeah, if you end up doing that, let me know, and I'll get in touch with you, and let me know, and we can get together during the day so that you don't have to travel down right before.
Okay, no, that'd be great.
Yeah,
awesome.
Hi, this is Sanjay. Actually,
sure.
I'm actually part of a front-end development team. We use Angular, React, and, you know, all sort of things.
Yeah. Okay. So can you speak closer to your mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. I can you hear me now? Clear?
Yeah, a little bit louder.
Yeah, so we are part of the front end team actually. Currently, one of
Yes.
the projects, okay, it's in Angular and React. We have different pieces like small apps at enterprise things. So if not Azure, I think people are talking about some Helm for
Oh, Helm. Yeah.
yeah. So can you give like little understanding of how it is different from AKS? Is it same or as a
Okay. I guess you're asking what is Helm?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I do have this slide here. Talk a little bit about Helm. So yeah, Helm. Helm is like a package manager, like npm, NuGet, you know,
Okay.
in simple terms, right? So so with Kubernetes in general, right, not just AKS, but just Kubernetes in general, once you have your YAML files, your Kubernetes YAML files, um, it just helps deploy like different releases, right? Your to dev, test, production, to make them kind of like dynamic, like put dynamic settings in there, configurable, like for each environment, and to deploy your applications kind of in one package. Because if you have a microservices, you have multiple of these YAML files. You know what I mean? And then Helm just kind of puts them, kind of packages them together in a
Yeah.
simple fashion so that it's for
Mm.
deployment, right, into Kubernetes. That's
So
basically what it is.
yeah, so we can combine like our multiple layers of my app into one single thing and then put it in Kubernetes.
Yeah, kind of like that,
Mm.
simple terms.
Very
Yeah.
useful actually. Oh, that's
Okay.
great.
So I'll take like, one last question. No more? Okay. Well, Neil, do you want to wrap it up?
Okay, I want to thank you.
Hello?
Yeah, thank you, Roy, and thank you, Neelam.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Have a good night. Okay. Okay, bye.
Yeah, Roy, will be getting the slides. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'll post it in a link to the meetup site.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Okay. I'll give it to Neil and Neil can post it.
yeah.
I'll
Thank you.
do that soon.
Oh, sorry about that. My mic just went off. Yeah, but thanks, Roy, for
Okay.
everything. This has
Yeah.
been very insightful. I learned a lot.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I hope to hear from you again if you have anything else to
Sure.
present.
Okay. Awesome.
That's great.
Okay. Okay, have a good night, guys. Okay,
Good night,
thank you.
guys.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Good night. It was very informative. Thank you.
Thank you.